Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and my channel is Discerning What is True. We're going to do the conclusion tonight of The Shadow of the Third Century. That is part two. That is chapter 10, that is, with Alvin Kuhn. So I hope that you're enjoying it. Appreciate you being here, and I wish you a good day, a good evening, I should say. And we're going to get into this piece. It's probably not going to be no more than 10 minutes long. Um, so we're going to do this. And let's see what we got here. Hold on just a second here. Here we go. So the last quote I was talking about was to do with General Macy, who is basically involved in what I call the occultic perspective of Scripture. The occultic perspective is simply a mystery. It's the great veil, so to speak, meaning it's simply most people will not understand it. And that's fine. I don't expect anybody really to expect it, to understand it because it's veiled. Because people are uh, basically don't understand. And it's just that's just the way it is. It's like bringing somebody in a you know a, a, kindergarten student, so to speak, and taking to a college class. Of course, they're not going to understand it. You see. So let's get into the reading here. Again, Gerald Macy, probably what I would call is the beginning of this particular guy who lived till approximately 1910, I think it is. He was an Englishman. He's wrote quite a few books, but he was involved in the Egyptology, which is a study of what was there religiously, what were they about, why was Egypt such a successful civilization, you may add. It lasted for thousands and thousands of years, and it used what they call hieroglyphs, and most people would not be able to understand until a Frenchman understood that in the late 18th, I guess mid 1800s, I think it is, the late 1800s. He understood it, and that's how we began to figure this. I take that back. It's actually when they studied uh, the uh, the emerald too, the emerald something to do with that, and I found it. Part of it's gone that he was, and he's someone that was a Frenchman that discovered how to understand what it was about. So here we go. Nothing less than epic in importance are these words in his which describe the tragic miscarriage of human intelligence. Yeah, this is we're still in the dark ages, folks. We are in a lot of ways. He is expatiating upon the consternation which struck the early Christians when the evidence began to come to view that the religion they had believed was wholly a new revelation from God was already in the books and practices of the ancient pagans. What I'm trying to explain here very simply is that what Christianity did was they borrowed all the information from the pagans. They just slightly changed some certain things and said basically it was literal instead of actually looking at it in a esoteric perspective, you see, which is hidden. Because that's what I said. Most people will not understand this. I'm not interested in basically numbers. I could care less. I don't really give a damn, to be honest with you. Okay? All I'm interested in is the truth. And if you're not interested in that, that's fine. It doesn't bother me. So that's your perspective. That's why we continue to we come here many times, many, many times. And we wonder why kids actually, young babies, cry when they first enter this particular realm. Because basically, they're back here again and having to go through what I call the underworld, or we call hell somewhat, you see. Anyway, the excerpt is taken from a brochure in his entitled that is the Logic of the Lord, or prehistorical sayings ascribed to Jesus the Christ, page 4. Quote, never were mortals more perplexed, bewildered, and taken back than the Christians of the second, third, and fourth centuries, who have started from their own new beginning, warranted to be solely historical, when they found that a apparent of their faith was following them one way and confronting them in another, a faith not founded on their alleged facts, claiming to be the original religion and ages on ages earlier in the world, a shadow that threatened to steal away their substance, mocking them with its aerial unreality, a hollow ghost of that body of truth, which that had embraced as a solid and eternal possession. It was horrible. It was devilish, you see. It was the devil, they said. And so they sought to account for Gnosticism, that is knowledge. That's what Gnostics means, knowledge, and fight down those fears of the phantom terrifying them in front and rear. The Gnostic anti-Christ, who had now become their antichrist, you see. The only primitive Christians then apart from or preceding the Christianized pagan church of Rome were the various acts, or so to say, various sects of Gnostics, not one of which was founded on a historical Christ. One and all were based on the mythical Christ of the Gnostics and the mythical Messiah, him who shall come because he was the ever coming one, as a type of the eternal manifestation figuratively in time. Historical Christianity can furnish no sufficient reason why the biography of this personal founder should have been held back, why the facts of its origins should have been kept dark, and why there should have been no authorized record made known earlier. The conversion of the myths and of the Docetic doctrines of the Gnostics into human history alone will account for the fact. The truth is, the earliest Gospels are the furthest removed from the supposed human history. That came last, and only when the spiritual Christ of the Gnostics had been rendered concrete in the density of Christian ignorance. Christianity began as Gnosticism, continued by means of a conversion and perversion that was opposed in vain by Paul. They see what they did simply is they put a spell on it. They put not a spell, but basically they wanted people to look at it in a literal term, and that's where people got off tangents. You see, the mysteries of the Gnostics were continued with a difference. As the first Christians built on secret doctrines that were only explained to initiatives during a long course of years. These mysteries were never to be divulged or promulgated, and were not until the beliefs in historical Christianity had taken permanent root. We are told how it was held by some that the apocalypse that might only be read by those who were perfected, and that these writings were reserved exclusively for the Christian adepts. It must be obvious that the doctrine or knowledge that was forced to be kept so sacredly secret, so that could have had no relation to the human history, personality, or teaching of a inspired founder of that primitive Christianity supposed to have had so simple a origin. Quote, now, there is plenty of evidence to show that these sayings, which are the omitted foundations of the canonic Gospels, were not first uttered by a personal founder of Christianity, nor invented afterwards by any of his followers. Many of them were prehistorical, and pre-Christian. End quote. It's going to be difficult to overthrow the logic and implications of this forthright passage when we recall Eusebius' admission that the Gospels were old books of the Essenes. See, they were. And this is why, we found which is a threat to Christianity today now, is to do with what I would call the works that were found in Syria and also in Egypt, the lost Gospels, and I can't think of it right quick, but we'll get it here in a minute. If most people have began to read and realize there's a different perspective here, you see. What the Christian church did was to destroy these, except the ones they kept themselves with. They kept them, and then they used them for what they've created, you see. And so they were hoping, and basically, that no one would ever find anything of this nature until basically the 1950s and 40s. Someone discovered them. It is going to be difficult to overcome. Okay, we said that. Need there be excuse for citing this long passage? It came in because it testifies on factual ground to the conversion of sublime mystical figuratism into impossible history. But it presents such a ludicrous pictogram of the situation and development that is to be repictured here, that it should be welcomed by those who believe that truth is worth having. This lifelong student of the Christian scriptures in relation to the unquestioned Egyptian sources pours out the incontestable established convictions of his knowledge to emancipate a world from baseless hallucinations. It's a small wonder that his prodigy's works have been permitted to go out of print, and that each copy that finds its way in an old bookshop is brought up as soon as it's discovered, some by eager and sincere students, other by persons who will see to it that it never reaches the public again. Yes. It is well to bear, I said, it's well to hear then his summary analysis of what this conversion produced for human society. This is based upon a book here of Lunology, page 2. Quote, there is nothing insane, nothing irrational in it. When considered in the light of evolution and when it is made of expression by sign language is thoroughly understood. The insanity lies in mistaking it for human history or divine revelation. Mythology is the depository of man's most ardent, or what we call ancient science. And what concerns us is chiefly is this. When truly interpreted once more, it is destined to be the death of those false theologians to which it has unwittingly given birth. End quote. Again, Gerald Massey himself carried that process of reinterpretation, which simply required the reconversion of alleged history back to allegory and then the elucidation of its mystical connotation or towards its completion. And others are now consuming his noble effects. It is the most important work being done in religion today. The primitive Christians of the group that fathered so-called apostolic and evangelical Christianity and declared all other groups heretics, though in their ignorance they were putting forth a new religion of transcendent light. Gerald Massey well pictured their unbounded dismay when they found the evidence pouring forth that they were only revamping old Egyptian religion. Their consternation at this discovery was the incident that drove them on to destroy all the books of ancient arcane science that would betray these telltale similarities and the true source. You know, that's what most people do. They want to destroy things of this nature. They're not interested in truth. They're interested in keeping the people in blindness. They could not well scorn and scoff at paganism when they found they had its own substance and paraphernalia in their hands. They could not condemn it when it was that which they themselves were exalting. What actually happened, though, the thing that to Massey himself, as it is others, had seemed incredible and impossible when first suggested for consideration, but which his evidence left him no alternate but to accept the complete metamorphosis of a figurative depreciation of esoteric truth into a large history. It's well described by Higgins in his book called Anaclapagus, page 33. Quote, these doctrines have been, like all of the other doctrines of antiquity, gradually corrupted, incarnated, if I may be permitted to compare or compose a word for the occasion. Quote, sublime philosophical truths or attributes have become clothed with bodies and converted into living characters. Perhaps this might take its origin from a wish in those professing them to conceal them from their vulgar eye, but the cause being forgotten, all ranks of society at last came to understand them in the literal sense, their real character being lost, or perhaps the incarnation might arise from a gradual pulling away of mankind from a high state of civilization, at which it must have arrived when these doctrines were discovered into a state of ignorance. The produce of revolutions, or perhaps merely of the great law of change, which in all natures seems to be eternally in operation. End quote. How completely this expresses the form and content of the analysis have presented, and can one refrain from printing Higgins' frank and faithful conclusion from this phenomenon? Quote, that the rabble were the victims of a degrading superstition, I have no doubt. This was produced by the conformity of the ancient priests, and it is in order to reproduce this effect that the modern priests have misinterpreted the doctrines of their predecessors. By vilifying and running down the religion of the ancients, they have thought that they could persuade their followers that their new religion was necessary for the good of mankind, a religion which, in consequences of their corruptions, had been found to be in practice much worse and more injurious to the interests of society than the older ones, end quote. For even of those who have been forced by their studies into this devastating and disheartening conviction, have had the openness to state it and front the storm of vilification that it would evolve. Yet it has been the conclusion, the unmistakable discernment of nearly every scholar who has covered the ground of the proper investigation of the ancient field. Massey and Higgins, like Strauss, Robertson, Smith, Drews, Duplass, Brandis, and Mead and Renan have been charged with narrow prejudice. If the body of conviction to which one is forced by the overwhelming and harrowing record of violence, fanaticism, bigotry, slaughter, imposture, and forgery is to be termed prejudice, then prejudice must for once be held both warranted and eminent desirable. None of the alleged tendency, none of the alleged traducers and critics of Christianity, any more than the present writer, began the study of Christian history with any other feeling than that of goodwill, if not even of high approval of the Christian religion. If the study has generated prejudice, it is because a shocking history has had to be weighed justly in the student's scale of judgments. We have cited Alfred Upward's forthright assertion that the Christian religion is the only one that has been completely founded on falsity. If intelligent men of sterling character had come to hold prejudice against Christianity, it is because they would confess to a, quote, prejudice against a record of fiction, fancy, and fatuity, insincerity, and naturally unmatched in humans' annuals. Prejudice of this stamp might be essential to the salvation of humanity if open-minded scholars come out of their study of Christianity with a decided bias or frank hostility. They must have encountered facts in their researches that superinduce such a attitude. These scholars have been prejudiced because they have first been horrified, delusional, frightened by what they have seen. It may spell calamity now and in the future that there is too little of this, quote, prejudice. Christianity started out with what uninstructed zealots thought, or were led to think by designating priests, was a wholly new religion of celestial truth passed straight down from heaven itself, but which soon proved to be a conglomerate mass, one might say mess, of pre-existent pagan material, contorted out of all recognition as esoteric wisdom and presented in the light of history. It was composed of scraps and crumbs of that one, quote, true religion proclaimed by Augustine as a already existing Christianity since Adam. But alas, the want of ability on the part of the Christians, since even Origen failed, to perform with these scraps and fragments a reconstitution of the original structure of meaning, such as Culliver would be to do reconstruction in the form of a mammoth or from a tooth, a jaw, or of a leg bone. Doom, the new movement that went forth to save mankind with inadequate tools, to condign failure. The net result was to admire the human reason in a melange of piety, zeal, weird belief, doubt, and expectation of the speedy end of the world that make the immediate and succeeding history of the West a nightmare of tragic ineptitude. And he's right. That's the end of the part I'm sharing. But yes, people call themselves Christians, and yet they killed all the other people. They don't tell you that, do they? They don't really ever tell you that because Christianity has such a hold in the West. The barbarity of all these people who were killed simply because they didn't agree or didn't know what they were talking about, and they just killed them. Most people don't know history. Most of it is now, in a lot of ways, especially the last 25 to 30 years, people have been basically dumbed down immensely. And that's why they can't think on their own. They cannot use logic to actually deduct certain things to be able to put it together. They just can't. And it's done on purpose. So, but anyway, thank you for listening and wish you good night. You take care, and we'll talk to you soon.